Hello everyone, and welcome to AP Biology, Unit 1, Part 1, the Chemistry of Life, and today we'll be going over why water is our supreme overlord, the structure and chemical properties of water, element basics, and acids and bases. Alright, let's start with elements, the absolute basics, and this is actually a unit that I like because it's very simple, and also it goes into some chemistry. So, elements are substances that cannot be broken down into simpler substances by chemical means. Examples of elements would be hydrogen, carbon, francium, europium, and californium. You can do hydrogen and carbon, or if you want to be pretentious like me, you can do francium, europium, and californium. And any of these on the periodic table are referred to as elements. The periodic table of elements is called the periodic table of, elements for a reason, turns out. So 96% of the mass of living things are composed of oxygen, carbon, and nitrogen, and the other 4% of the mass of all living things is calcium, phosphorus, potassium, sulfur, sodium, chlorine, and magnesium. You do not need to memorize the other 4% necessarily. The 96%, you should probably know that oxygen, carbon, and nitrogen are important. And trace elements include iron, iodine, copper, which are required. However, they're required in smaller amounts than, say, oxygen, carbon, and nitrogen. Now we have subatomic particles. So, the atom is the smallest unit of an element that retains its characteristic properties. And inside of an atom, you have protons, or an atom is composed of protons, neutrons, and electrons. Protons and neutrons are in the nucleus, and electrons orbit on rings that surround the nucleus. Here we have a beautiful, drawing of an atom with the rings and the electron and the neutron and the nucleus. Yeah. So electrons have a negative charge, protons have a positive charge, and neutrons are neutral, like Switzerland. They don't have a charge. And they're neutral. The majority of atoms are have the same number of protons and electrons, and are therefore neutral. If they weren't neutral, they would be classified as an ion, not a atom. So atoms, the vast majority, are neutral. And therefore they have the same amount of protons and electrons. Isotopes are atoms that possess the same number of protons as their element, but a different number of neutrons in the nucleus. And yes, I couldn't help myself with Switzerland neutrality memes. So just enjoy those. Compounds. Compound is when two or more individual elements are combined in a fixed ratio, and they form a chemical compound. Compounds have different properties from their elements. Think like a grilled cheese or a cupcake taste different than their ingredients individually. You can test this if you would like. I guarantee you a grilled cheese and a cupcake taste different from flour and salt individually. Hydrogen equals gas. Oxygen is also a gas, and then you have, this is a more, chemistry-based example. So you have hydrogen and oxygen, and they combine to make H2O, which tends to be in a liquid form, whereas hydrogen and oxygen by themselves tend to be in a gaseous form. Gaseous form. I hope that's a word. Chemical reaction example, again, hydrogen plus oxygen. A real life example, you could have America plus Russia equals the Cold War. I am going to keep making history jokes or history references. You can decide if they're funny or not. Ionic bonds steal and give electrons, which result in ions because one atom becomes positive and the other becomes negative. In that bond, they don't really share. They kind of just steal and give back and forth. Hence ionic, ionic. And then we have covalent bonds, which are in compounds, as are ionic bonds that hold things together. And covalent bonds share electrons with one another. So their electrons are equally shared. If their electrons are equally shared, it's called a non-polar covalent. And if it's unequally shared, it's called a polar covalent, because one side has greater electronegativity than the other and therefore is either partially positive. The compound would be partially positive, partially negative. Like water, you have oxygen, which is partially negative, and then you have the hydrogens, which are positive. Now we have the star of the show, ladies and gentlemen. Water. Why is water important, aside from, being a necessity of life? Well, it has a very important role in chemical reactions. Water is composed of 2 hydrogen atoms and 1 oxygen atom, hence H2O. In water, electrons are not shared equally within water molecule. Electrons are not shared equally in water molecules. The hydrogen atoms are partially positive, whereas the oxygen atoms the oxygen atom is partially negative. Thus, water molecules are polar, which indicates that they have a positive section and a negative section, so there's charged regions. And the negatively charged ends are attracted to positively charged ends. That's why water molecules stick to one another, which forms water beads and raindrops on surfaces, because you're going to have the hydrogens be attracted to the oxygens, and then the oxygens of other water molecules. So then they're going to stick together. Similarly, the negative oxygens will be attracted to the positive hydrogens of other water molecules. I don't know why I can't talk today. The aforementioned attraction is referred to as hydrogen bonds, which are weak chemical bonds that form when a hydrogen atom that is covalently bonded to one electronegative atom is also attracted to another electronegative atom. That's a very convoluted sentence or definition, but basically it's just a hydrogen attached to something that makes it positive or charged is then attracted to some other molecule that is charged, or atom that is charged. Yeah. Hydrogen bonds contribute to cohesion, surface tension, water's high heat capacity, and water's expansion upon freezing. Cohesion and adhesion. Cohesion is the tendency of water molecules to stick to one another. A group of people cooperate on a group project. You can try to cooperate with an alligator or giraffe. It's unlikely to go particularly well for you, though. An example would be transpiration in plants. Water evaporates from the leaf. As a result of cohesion, other molecules are dragged upward and ultimately up the stem of the plant. So basically, 2 water molecules, they're the same, they're water molecules, attracted to each other. It's water's tendency to be attracted to other water molecules. And adhesion is the tendency of water to stick to other surfaces. Think to add an additional object or thing, and that would be 2 people hugging versus a person and a cat hugging. You have 2 of the same versus 2 different things. And an example would be 2 glass slides stuck to one another due to water adhering to glass surfaces. So if you have 2 glass slides, have you ever been in a lab where you had 2 glass slides and there's water in between and it's difficult to remove them from each other? That would be adhesion. And capillary action includes cohesion and adhesion, and it accounts for water's ability to rise up roots, trunks, and branches of trees. Because it occurs due to the fact that it occurs within the vessels, it's referred to as capillary action. Here's a little image of it. The water travels up through the plant. Water is absorbed by the roots and goes up the roots, adhesion and cohesion, and then it has transpiration, or it undergoes transpiration and leaves the leaf because the moisture outside of the plant is different from the moisture inside of the plant, and osmosis and equilibrium. Then you have this little diagram of adhesion, cohesion, and adhesion. Adhesion is to the other substance, and cohesion is to other water molecules. Surface tension. So cohesion contributes to surface tension. Water molecules formulate a surface via attaching to one another. And you're likely to hear this example nearly 1,000 times. I swear to you, this will come up so much, you may as well get used to it. So, it does still haunt me to this day. Surface tension allows water striders to balance upon the surface of ponds, lakes, etc. Basically, bodies of water. So, yes, here is a picture of the water striders that you will hear about forever. High heat capacity. Water has a high heat capacity, which a high heat capacity basically means it is difficult. A high heat capacity means, or heat capacity in general means, the difficulty of an object to be heated by 1 degree. And water has a high heat capacity, which is basically the ability of it to resist temperature changes. So, therefore, a high specific heat means it's relatively difficult to boil or heat up. Liquid water is essential to cellular structures. As you may have known, we have a plethora of water inside of us, as in we are mainly composed of water, and it's essential to cellular structures. It has a high specific heat, which is the reason why we, don't go out in the sun and literally boil. So, ability to resist heat temperatures allows for ocean temperatures to remain fairly stable, and it allows organisms that are predominantly composed of water to maintain a relatively constant body temperature. Okay, expansion on freezing. Freezing is the result of hydrogen bonding. Hydrogen bonds cause water to expand on freezing. Liquid water, molecules are slightly more dense than in solid water or ice. Therefore, water becomes less dense on freezing and is capable of floating on top of bodies of water, which allows the animals beneath it to survive. If the ice sunk to the bottom would be cold, and then the fish would die because they would freeze to death. Summary on water. Water is polar, and therefore it's capable of dissolving other polar substances, dissolves like, as my chemistry teacher always said. Water possesses cohesive and adhesive properties, and water has a high heat capacity, which is vital for living organisms. Water expands on freezing, and therefore ice is less dense when it floats. I have no regrets regarding this photoshopped image, just, beautiful. Okay. I made that, by the way. Yeah, it's beautiful, isn't it? Okay. Acids and bases. The majority of reactions occur in watery solutions. And water is a great solvent. Basically, water is great to dissolve other things into because it's polar, so it can dissolve other polar substances. Reactions are influenced by the pH of the solution in which they occur. Acidic contains a large quantity of H+ ions below pH of 7, and a pH of 7 is neutral. Below that would mean it's acidic. And for instance, stomach acid is pH of 2. If you dissolve an acid in water, it will release many hydrogen ions and the solution will become acidic. Basic and / alkaline, it depends how fancy you want to be with your terminology, releases hydroxide ions, or OH negative ions. Slippery consistency, above a 7 pH, or pH of 7, and again, neutral would be pH of 7. I'm not going to make another Switzerland joke, but yeah, okay, there you go. And an increase in H+ ions causes a decrease in the pH. So here's the formula for pH, and you're not required to memorize it, just understand the basic principle that one pH number change represents a 10-fold change in hydrogen ion concentration. So for example, you have a pH of 4 would be 10 times more acidic than a pH of 5, or a pH of 5 would be 10 times more basic from a pH of 4. As concentration of H plus ions increases by factors of 10, pH becomes one number smaller. For example, you have a pH of 2 equals 10 to the negative 2 mole H plus ion concentration. A low concentration of H plus ions equals a high pH. Thank you for watching, and happy studying, and I hope to see you soon. Please like and subscribe if you found this helpful and you enjoyed. All right.